Kirti series.
Namaste. Welcome again to Maurya Lok. This is episode 5 and we are discussing clothing. In the last episode, we had seen that cloth was spun and woven out of different materials. We had ended up with these strips of cloth of cotton, silk, etc. Now, how were these worn? The one word to remember while we are discussing clothing in modern times is drapery. So drape, drape, drape. That was how clothes were fashioned for the body of the individual, whether it be a man or a woman. They were functional, comfortable, and worn according to the desire of the individual to conceal or to reveal the body. This drapery was done in many different ways, and we have evidence of different styles from sculptures, from coins, from textual descriptions, and I will tell you a little bit about them as we go along. Now look at this figure. This figure is of a Sunga Mauryan man from Bharhut. What is he wearing? You can discern three basic items of clothing. These three basic items are the Uttariya for the top of the body, then there is an Antariya for the bottom half of the body, and there is a Kaya Bandh for the waist. This man also wears an Ushnish over here, which is a kind of turban, and sometimes when hair was long, it was tied up in the Ushnish. So these three pieces of unstitched cloth, the Uttariya, the Antariya and the Kaya Bandh, were the three main items of clothing for Mauryan men. He is also wearing jewelry. So you can see that there are kundals in the ear, there are armbands, there is a kada. So men wore jewelry and they flaunted their jewelry depending on how much money they had and how many resources they had. Now let us move on to women. Look at this figure. This figure is also after a particular sculpture. Now this woman also wears those same three items of clothing, the Uttariya, the Antariya and the Kaya Bandh. So these three pieces of unstitched cloth are draped in different ways. You can also see that she is wearing her Antariya in a particular way, which is called the dhoti style, which meant that the cloth was pulled up between the legs and tucked behind. But there were many other styles of wearing your Uttariya. You had the Machavalak, which was the fish scale style, or you had the Lehenga style, or you could have the Bhair Nivasani, which was a kind of tubular skirt. You can see that this lady has two Uttariyas, one on her head and the other around her shoulder, because that is her fancy. There are many styles, and a certain amount of little bit of research has been done on it. Much more is needed. Notice that apart from the Kaya Bandh, the lady also wears a Mekhla, which is a metal belt. This is apart from the cloth which is there around the waist. And of course, she wears a veritable treasure house of jewelry, from the top of the head to the tip of the toe. There is a chudamani, there could be chudamani in the hair, which is a hair ornament, and then you can see that there is a sitara. The sitara was made of many precious and semi-precious materials, not like my fabric one, but much more fancy ones. Now look at her neck. Around the neck was a absolute cornucopia of styles. It would need a full episode to explain all of them or those to you. So it could be a lambanam, which is a very long necklace, or it could be a ekvalli, which is a single thread, or a chauladi or a satladi. It could be a hem sutra, it could be a falakhar. Like I said, the list goes on. There were also angulikas around the fingers. Then there was keyur, that is an armband. Then there was that metal belt made out of precious or semi-precious metals. Then there were anklets, there could be a kada. So you see that women wore jewelry, and women as well as men use this jewelry to show off their body, to show off and decorate their bodies. All these items of jewelry had some meaning. Of course, we cannot go into those meanings right now, but all of them had some meaning or the other. The description I have given you has been of unstitched cloth. But what about stitched cloth? Did it exist? Yes, it did. Although drapery of unstitched cloth was the hallmark of ancient Indian costume, stitched cloth also existed because of the interface and the relations with the Persians and the Greeks. So it could be an angarakha for men, or it could be a cholak for women. Soldiers' clothes were those with the maximum elements of stitched cloth. So clothes were worn according to a certain philosophy. Now there was a certain philosophy as to how they were to be worn, where were they to be loose, where were they to be tight, etc. I could even say that there is a kind of philosophy matching with the yogic philosophy that we know so much about. There was also another aspect, which is the symbolic aspect of clothing. So there was a spiritual and religious aspect to it, there was a status aspect to it. From the clothes, you could make out the place of that individual in society. And remember, of course, that clothes were also designed functionally. So a farmer would wear clothes which would make it easy for him to farm. An artisan would wear clothes which would make it easy for him to do his work. Now, an interesting idea to ponder on. Is there some relationship between this unstitched cloth and the kind of clothes we wear today? Yes, indeed there is. Look at the sari I am wearing. Of course, this exact style of wearing a sari is the product of the women of the family of Rabindranath Tagore, but that is a separate issue. The sari proper, is the way the uttariya has evolved. The petticoat is perhaps the antariya, and you can see that there is a cholak. So there is a straight line between, or let us say the roots of these clothes do lie far back in the past, our own traditional clothes, and I do not mean Western clothes. Men have switched to trousers, but as far as dhotis are concerned, look at this picture from Mathura. Can you recognize it? Of course, it's a very recognizable dhoti. Now look at these two saris. Can you believe that these two saris are 2000 years old? They would fit in very easily on any woman of today. So remember that there is a straight line from the clothes of ancient India, Mauryan times, to the clothes of today, that is the Indian clothes. And in whichever way the sari is worn or designed or put on the body in different parts of the country. I will end this section leaving you with a very important point to ponder about clothes. They were gender neutral. Did you notice that I said the antariya, the uttariya and the kayaband were the three main pieces of clothing, both for men and for women. So this kind of trouser skirt binary did not exist. Men and women wore the same clothes in almost the same way, except to suit their own personal or situational desires or whatever position they were in. So what kind of society is it that has gender neutral clothes for the people? Dwellings. Where did the Mauryans live? What kind of houses did they live in? What kind of cities were there? First, I will tell you about the materials. So the houses, palaces, etc. were made of wood mostly. Then they were made of stone. Then they were made of brick and mud, baked bricks and mud. Then they were made of wattle and daub. And they ranged in size and complexity and prosperity from the palace of the king to the humble house of a farmer or the ashram of an ascetic. So let us look at a palace first. I am showing you the plan of a palace as it appears in the Arthashastra. This is an artist's view of it from my book Urnabhi. And you can see that the palace is designed to have everything that the king needs, desires and must have inside that whole complex. Now this would have been a wooden, spacious, huge colonnaded structure in front of a river or some waterfront, and it would have been of a couple of stories, 2-3 stories, beautifully decorated with frescoes, murals, sculptures, and the Mauryan motif of the silver creeper with the golden bird. So the columns were decorated with silver creepers and golden birds. Of course, only the king could afford this, but other people used this motif as and when and how they could. But everyone did not live in a palace. What everyone did have, and what this palace also had, was a garden. So the Mauryan garden was a beautiful, flamboyant, wonderful, complex place in which you could get lost. So you can see this illustration. There were, of course, all kinds of trees and plants, and many were imported with special people to look after those trees and grow them, turn them into beautiful shapes. There were artificial ponds, artificial hills, and many artificial structures for people to play in, disport themselves in. There were fish in those ponds, there were animals in the garden, there were birds in the garden. Chandragupta Maurya's favorite birds were parrots, and they wheeled around his head and went with him wherever he went. So gardens, and of course this is the most beautiful garden that very rich people could have, but smaller people had smaller gardens. This is a courtier's palace, as you can see, and it has all the elements that I have just spoken about. Now, apart from these courtiers' palaces, there were people who lived in the cities and there were people who lived in the towns. So here you can see a town house of a rich merchant, for example, or a rich courtier. Here now you can see a country house of a very well-off and very rich person. And now these illustrations are of a different set of buildings which you would have found if you wandered around Mauryan India. These are farmers' huts, these are ascetics' ashrams, these are religious structures. You would have found this if you had wandered around Mauryan India. What this shows you is that there was a whole spectrum of houses that people lived in, from the very rich to the very poor. And then of course there were those people who lived outside in harmony with nature. Talking of nature, remember, these houses were built around the principles of Vastu Shastra, around the principles of oneness and harmony with nature. And as you can see in the illustrations, animals and plants were not segregated. It was not the way we live today, where most people's houses have no animals except maybe for a pet or two, and very few plants. It was a way of living in the midst of nature. And these illustrations would have made that very clear to you. Now, what were the sizes of the cities that they lived in? The biggest city of all was, of course, Patliputra. And it is said that even at that time, it had 140,000 inhabitants. This is an artist's view, a stylized view of Patliputra. The source is again the description in the Arthashastra, and this illustration is again from my book Urnabhi. Look how well planned the city is. The roads cut each other at right angles. Everything has a place and everything is in its place. The Arthashastra also mandates many civic and urban rules which had to be followed regarding cleanliness, regarding where you built your house, regarding how you dealt with your neighbors. Spitting, defecating, etc. were heavily fined, by the way. So the Mauryan man or woman possibly lived in a better planned, more beautiful and cleaner city than we do today. So Patliputra was, of course, the big capital which was famous across the world. But there were also smaller towns. You had the four capitals, Ujjaini, Tosali, Suvarnagri, etc. And then you had big towns like Ayodhya, Kashi. And you also had smaller towns like Kapilvastu, which would have had about 4,000 or 5,000 people. Then there were smaller villages. So there was again a whole spectrum of the way that the entire area, geographical area, had been prepared for the way humans had to live in it. It brings us to the end of these two episodes where we have been looking in depth at the way people ate, the way people, what people wore, and the way people lived. What lessons can we draw from it? This was a very prosperous kingdom. There was a level of comfort, there was a level of prosperity. Everyone had food to eat, places to live, and more or less clothes to wear. So I'm not saying that everyone was rich, but certainly the kind of poverty that we associate with our country today was not there. Then again, the principles were of harmony, and the principles were also of sustainability. The idea of taking everything from nature and giving nothing back was not there. The Indic Hindu idea of living at one with nature, growing along with it, and growing in such a way that both nature and man can exist in prosperity and can exist in happiness. Perhaps this is one thing that we can really learn, this lesson that we can really learn of harmony, sustainability, and the unity of the cosmos. See you again next time. Namaskar.
From the tangible to the intangible, we move on to explore the Janpad, the land and the people in greater depth. There are so many different facets of society to choose from. And what more interesting, topical, and intriguing than? Let me give you a hint. Half the world consists of them, and all the world issues from them. Put your guesses in the comment box, and you will know next Saturday if you were right.